For more on how the pandemic is specifically affecting school reopenings across the country, I want to bring in Robin Lake. She is the director at the Center for Reinventing Public Education. Robin, great to have you. So your organization has taken an in-depth look at how different school districts are working to get students back into physical classrooms. What are some of the specific plans you think actually work well, and where do you still see room for improvement?
Yeah, it's great to be with you. This has been a trying time for school districts, educators, families, and certainly students. We've been tracking pandemic response in school districts since last March, and we've learned a lot. So school districts have really had time to understand what are the health guidelines, what are the safety protocols that will keep kids safe, and really start with phased reopening, starting small, going carefully, communicating to families about how it's going, and being really transparent about the health and safety.
And how much learning time have students actually lost since schools shifted to remote lessons? And how can school officials actually make up for all of that lost learning?
You know, all students have suffered in some way, whether it's just social isolation and challenges at home. But lost learning time is a significant issue for all kids. We've seen real variation, though, in how it's affecting different students, of course. But across the board, we're especially worried about math scores. Those are scores in content that kids really need to continue learning the foundational skills so that we don't fall farther and farther behind. Some of them may have lost a third to a half, some of them even a full year of learning at this point.
Well, according to the Center for Reinventing Public Education, your organization, lower income students were less likely to have access to quality remote learning. How else has the pandemic impacted education equity here in the U.S.?
Yes, well, public education has always been inequitable in a lot of ways, but we're seeing in the pandemic that everything is exacerbated. And so we're seeing the differences in learning loss play out differently for income, race, disability, even gender and age. All those things are playing into the inequities that we're seeing. Students of color, low-income students are much more likely to experience remote learning, to not have their schools open at this point. They're more likely to have trouble connecting, even still a year into the pandemic. They may not have stable Wi-Fi or devices to be able to engage remotely. And we're seeing higher rates of course failure and other academic indicators that are very worrisome. These are kids who were already behind pre-pandemic and could fall farther and farther behind. I mean, the good news is it doesn't have to be this way. We are seeing great examples of districts, schools, community leaders, and parents who are stepping up to the moment and finding ways to fill those holes.
I want to ask you more about that, but before we get into some of those good examples, I want to know what educators should be doing to deal with this inequity. Ultimately, if kids have lost an entire year of learning, particularly kids from, as you say, disadvantaged backgrounds who were already not given the same type of education as other students in this country, should we be looking at ideas like having an extra year of school for kids? Where do we actually solve this problem, at least in the short term, in terms of getting the kids the education that they've lost?
Yes, well, every week matters. So the first thing that we need to do is start with real urgency and understanding that getting kids back into classrooms as quickly as possible and putting in place evidence-based strategies that we know work for catching kids up. And so some of those, for example, are really intensive and focused tutoring, one-on-one or small group instruction for kids. And we can do that remotely. That is absolutely possible. We can also look at strategies like, we know that high quality teachers matter. Let's find ways to leverage master teachers so that the kids who are most in need get access to the best teachers in the country or even the world right now to catch them up in the areas where they need help. And then finally, we need to use the most creative strategies we can think of. So you mentioned more time. We can do that by leveraging the summer. We can have camps all over the country that are oriented around not just addressing learning loss, but also making sure that kids can have fun outdoors safely and start reconnecting with their peers and establishing friendships again. So every week matters. School districts around the country are doing this. And then we can also look to communities who have stepped up during this period and found solutions that we would not have thought of if we had just kind of stayed in the box of traditional public education. And we're seeing so many examples of that right now. You know, normal.
Well, I'm hoping you can. Robin, I'm hoping you can tell us about some of those examples, because I know that there's a lot of parents and teachers around the country who are still sort of trying to figure out how to make learning work in this environment. What are the lessons that we can learn from schools that are doing a good job at teaching during the pandemic?
Sure. Well, one of the strategies that we've seen a lot of districts employing right now is what I would call high expectations paired with high support. And, you know, for any parent or any teacher, that might not sound like something that's particularly innovative, but school districts are really focusing in on the skills that students most need to have addressed in the moment, not lowering standards, because this is not the time to tell students we don't believe in them. It's the time to tell them we think that their promise is boundless and we can help them live up to that promise. And then providing tons of support, academic support, but also social and emotional support. There are many, many community assets that we can bring to the table right now to address kids' mental health needs and help them really fully engage in learning and be wholly present for the learning that they're fully capable of taking on.
What a beautiful message. We think your promise is boundless. Every child should hear that. Robin Lake, thank you.
Thank you.